Initiating neurostimulation.
I don't want to die! What's up? I don't want to die!
Matrix enhanced. Terminal time shift.
I always remember TimeShift as being one of the first 7th gen FPS games, but it was about 2 years in until it came out. What's interesting is that it could have been. It had several demos available through 2005 and early 2006. It had the same concepts, and some sections are still near identical, but the demo's reception was mainly bad and Atari was already bleeding money at that point, so they sold it off to Vivendi, who already had an FPS hit on their hands after publishing Fear. However, before they launched the game, they gave the developers another year to overhaul it. And what came next was a huge graphical upgrade and art shift, along with a massive rewrite of the story. The story in particular is pretty nuts, because if you've played TimeShift, you know it has a silent protagonist. I knew this wasn't always the case, but didn't know just how far that went.
I'll just take his lens after I put a bullet in his head.
I play Colonel Swift in the game TimeShift. He is ex-military, he's very smart.
It's worth mentioning this was originally going to be a previous gen game, and the amount of old builds and cut content floating around online and in the game itself is definitely interesting. So the term development hell is appropriate, and to no surprise, the game still has some issues now. For example, the Steam version currently doesn't have the latest patch. The GOG version does, and this was an official patch, not some obscure fan thing, so I'm not sure what happened there. But it means the native Steam version has some more graphical issues and some bugs, which can include the enemy armor system not functioning correctly, making the game way easier. Of course, this all assumes you were actually able to launch it, and this goes for both versions. Luckily, there's a fixed EXE made by a GOG forum user that takes care of that. So that should all get you going, and I'll link it down below. If you want to be extra fancy, the game does support EAX sound, though the game menu itself won't reflect that it's actually on. This gives the game those cool environmental reverb effects, though it might not always make sense, like why your earpiece is doing that.
So we've been digging through all this intel that you hacked. Listen to this. I've always known Krone has been running a huge munitions operation for years, but now we know exactly where this thing is. If you can get inside and take care of business, this could be the tipping point to getting us to Krone.
But let's be real, you're getting this for the weapon effects.
Trouble coming!
And that about covers the essentials, so let's get started.
The entire building has collapsed, and it was on top of a huge underground facility. This might be the cause of our citywide power outage.
Disaster has struck the mysterious research lab. Liver King Dr. Kleiner, also known as Dr. Krone, has stolen the Alpha Suit, a highly advanced quantum device, and attacks Black Hole. It allows only a single user to travel across time. But thanks to generous public funding, there's also the Beta Suit. This one is more militarized, has local time control technology, and comes equipped with Sam, who is an AI who could do everything from warn from dangers to automatically jump out to avoid a paradox. So even though Krone left before you and sabotaged the facility, you play as Time Man, who chases him in the Beta Suit. And yeah, I know that alone already causes a bunch of people to type out plot holes because those are endless for time travel stories, but they later confirm there are multiple timelines and the Alpha Suit jumped across that. Or something. Well, wherever you are, it is a very different 1939. Krone has gone back and used his knowledge of future events and science to become the ruler of the world. At least I assume the world. A lot of what happened or what is happening is kept extremely vague, and we'll talk more about why that is soon. But for now, you must help the resistance defeat Krone, because surely all the details will fall into place later. So let's talk about that visual overhaul. The good news is that the game does look next-gen on a technical level. For back then anyways, but as someone who's more used to FPS games from then just being a port on PC, this one holds up surprisingly more than I thought it would, especially when it comes to shaders, and the lighting is good too. This is one of those things that YouTube compression absolutely massacres, but the rain in particular is a standout. Krone's Alpha District has a Matrix 3 amount of rain to the point that it feels like you might be able to drown. That's already good for setting that kind of apocalyptic tone, but for a game with time control powers, it's perfect. Since you can temporarily slow, halt, or reverse time, having rain is the perfect encompassing visual. You see that you're controlling the flow of all time and not just stuck in a little bubble. It's not always raining, since sometimes the weather does clear up, or you might go to a different environment out in the country, like the woods or a snowy mountain pass. Though sadly, no snow actually falls there. It ends up being a gray and muted game overall, which a lot of shooters from 7th gen were like that, but this is one where it does feel appropriate even if they were clearly drawing from other games for this approach. Especially when you see what the game looked like before, where it's more colorful, cartoony, and the technology looks more clockwork and steampunk inspired. You still get some echoes of the old art style, like there are some propaganda posters that are completely untouched. Because I did look, and I don't think the Crone Samurai are around anymore, because before it seems they wanted to give you a completely alien timeline, and now it's trickier. Because you could say that Crone's world is a retro future. There are big blocky computers, you'll notice Jetsons-styled Roombas around, and just other things that are a 50s or 60s idea of the future. Then you encounter mechs, which seem like they wouldn't be too far out of place in Battletech. Enemy soldiers can be decked out in thick armor, and a lot of them wouldn't look out of place inside of Fear. Then some vehicles and tech look a little more diesel punk. Big, inefficient, brutal machines that do get the job done. Then, running through all of that, there's a Leonardo da Vinci theme. The skies are filled with airships, and planes have that kind of wing shape you would draw. When you unlock concept art, a good amount uses the Vitruvian Man. So you encounter weird combinations of these things, like what looks like a modern jet engine packed into something Da Vinci would draw. But then there are holdovers and remixes from the old version of the game, like your pistol having a digital counter on it. And your main carbine is just the most gun to ever gun. This could easily be from Killzone or Haze. A lot of guns in the games of this era were affected by what I like to call Halo drift. Because when Bungie made the guns for Halo, they were scaled for Master Chief and other Spartans. Huge post-human cyborg freaks. When you put those same guns on Marines, they're cartoonishly big, and now Halo has had to stick with it. But even there, they've only tried to tone it down without breaking the style too much. Anyways, if you wondered why guns can be so big on characters in this era, this is mainly why. But beyond that, a lot of character designs wouldn't look out of place in Gears of War, which came out almost exactly a year before. Like, sure, it's an alternate 1939, but everyone looks and talks like it's the mid-2000s.
Switches are in the control room! Hurry, bro! Hurry!
Don't blow your wig yet, Time Man, we gotta get to the train. This isn't me saying, ooh, you're mixing up art styles. It's more that some ideas and art direction they have is neat, but it clashes a lot with other elements in it, which you could still argue if it's the whole time is all messed up angle. The issue is, all of this is filtered through here's what's popular now, which makes it more generic than it could have been. In the story, you're arriving in what I assume is Crone's capital. There are lots of buildings and facilities and giant statues of the man, but when you get there, it's already a bombed-out war zone with an active rebel force in it. There are rotting interiors covered in graffiti, contrasted by highly advanced technology inside of them, which makes sense when it's in Half-Life 2. The Combine only care about resource efficiency and don't give a single shit about aesthetics. So enhancing a decrepit area as little as possible made sense for them. And there were other games that drew from this concept that did work visually and fit inside the story they were telling. This makes no sense for an egomaniac who clearly cares deeply about his image. There are some locations that lean into this more, but precious few compared to what you've seen a million times before. It's a choice that waters everything down into mush. I mean, I'm gonna guess the game being set in 1939 wasn't an accident, unless they're all Ozheads, but you don't have the under-equipped rebels now fighting the mysterious faction armed with future weaponry. Sure, they're losing the fight, but such a massive battle happening in a bombed-out capital isn't a great sign of strength for the regime. Because the story is so thin, you mainly only have these visual cues to go off of. There's no slow unfolding of the world where you're dropped into the Crone regime and you're the spark that ignites the rebellion. There's no build up to the uprising, no magic hero from the future that turns the tide. Instead, you don't feel that significant and the world you're in doesn't feel real either. For all of the good ideas that it does have in its art direction, it ends up feeling like a fake game that would play on CSI. And if you've ever played any Half-Life game, it starts coming across as a fever dream. Like, it took me a while to realize I was fighting the police over the military for the first few chapters.
Let's see your papers.
I guess I should have known with the Crone cast.
This so-called occupant uprising was destined to fail from its inception.
Goodbye, Dennis Quaid. Welcome, silent protagonist. So, how about the sound? It's fairly average all around. There are some good punchy sound effects, but also a lot of unmodified stock ones as well. At first, your gun's not slowing down for bullet time seems disappointing, but there's more to it. Because you have games like Fear where everything slows down, including the sound effects. TimeShift will do that for your enemies, but not for your own. This is still fun in its own right, especially since slowing down time speeds you up slightly. So if anything, your version of bullet time is the priority lane. I've got no complaints there. As for the music, TimeShift definitely has some. It's action music and sometimes you notice it. It's competent, but I get nothing from it. I don't know, the mixing on some tracks seems a little harsh, but it doesn't feel worth going into. It's all okay. Let's just move on to the game itself. There's a lot of joy to be found in time control games, especially ones where you can shoot someone in the face. Sometimes it doesn't matter if there's an amazing story or a nothing story. Good mechanics can bridge anyone.
And they got this game, right, for people who smoke or people who drink. Like if you drink beer and you get drunk, or if you smoke weed and you get high, and you just anything, like if you just be getting fucked up. The funny part about it, you can do this right like this.
On a base level, TimeShift is a 7th gen FPS. You have the 2-weapon limit, the regenerating health, the helicopter boss, it's all here. But outside of time powers, there's still good stuff worthy of attention. This comes with a big asterisk, but the firefights with enemies can be pretty good for the time. They have solid audio callouts and a nice mix of dynamic reactions to what you're doing, along with some scripted events along the way to make them seem smarter. The actual gunplay doesn't feel amazing, but it is nice having well-animated enemies to fight. They're not to the level where you'd want to do a no time power run like Max Payne or Fear, because no matter what difficulty you play it on, if you find it challenging, that's going to be very front-loaded. When you first get playing, your weapon roster is limited, along with your use of time powers. Even with your suit's armor, most of the enemies are better protected, and you'll usually die quickly in a straight-up fight. This quickly changes when you get manual control of your powers. All of them require suit energy to use, which recharges over time. Your time slow ability also drains your bar the slowest. It also increases your fire rate and your movement speed, along with making your health regenerate faster. So this alone is absurdly strong, but it's also the most familiar to abilities in other games. Stopping time doesn't speed you up any, but it's so powerful that it doesn't need to. It does drain faster than slowing, but it's a few moments to do whatever you want with no retaliation. Also, since time is stopped to the atomic level, you can also walk across water and walk through flames unharmed. Some enemies could have defenses that stopping time completely gets rid of. And there are extra fun touches too, like being able to grab a gun out of an enemy's hands. Stuff like that is fun to play around with and see what you can do, but other than that, the power drain and lack of speed still make it less attractive than just slowing things down. That leaves you with reversing time, which is by far the most interesting power. The energy drain is similar to halting time, but where that is basically slow-mo's slower cousin, here you can be a lot more tactical with it in ways that feel satisfying. Did someone chuck a grenade at you? Fuck you, it never happened. Did you wander into an area where people start shooting at you? Just reverse time to before when they heard you in the first place. You can't undo damage you've already taken because, again, the suit is in its own realm, but it still gives you a kind of superhero shooter feeling that a lot of other games still don't have. If you die, you still have to load a game, but you can cheat death before that. I'm sure if this was made today, if you died, Sam would let you watch yourself be auto-returned to the checkpoint. For now, it sure is useful for being sneaky. Being able to get the drop on people by slowing or halting time, and then having a turnaround where you can actually reverse time if they get the drop on you, is great. Plus the effect of seeing time unfreeze, and all the chaos you planted springs in an instant. There are flashes of greatness throughout the game, and you're guaranteed to have some cool moments. Finally, you can roll your half-elf katana rogue again and the DM can't stop you. When it's at its best, TimeShift feels like a time control playground, it's more just how often that actually happens. Due to a combination of your time powers and probably reusing levels from the previous gen, there are a lot of narrow spaces you fight in. Especially early on, but even when things open up more, it barely takes advantage of these spaces. You can pass through a large room filled with boxes and cover that feels like it should be a fighting arena and nothing happens in it. Or you go through a giant tank factory and then most of your time is spent fighting on a narrow walkway. When you get to the bottom, there are barely any enemies at all. They introduce enemy time-shifting enemies, which are supposed to be an equal to you, and I'm not sure how they work, but you still mop the floor with them. Fairly early on, you get an explosive bow with a large magazine that one-shots enemies. Whenever I had it, I still tried aiming for the head to make it a little more fun, but it's still a cakewalk machine. Plus, even though each time power is bound to a key, you can also press another button to have Sam select a power for you. This is usually slow-mo in combat, but when it means a physics puzzle, it means there's no guesswork, and even without that, there's not much to guess. And wouldn't you believe it, but the reverse puzzles are also the best ones. There aren't many weapons that take advantage of the time mechanic, and most are Half-Life derivatives again. The game is only about 5 or 6 hours long, but that is about the time when the gimmick starts getting old, so that works out. The premise for this game and the time powers used properly are fantastic. It's just the incredible lack of substance to it. When it comes to game remakes, this is more the kind of thing I'd want to see. An amazing idea with flawed execution that could really shine. Because I did find lots of little things to appreciate, but as a package, it just leaves your brain immediately. Like the story, which is so bare bones nothing, and ironically repetitive, like helping the rebels escape on a Zeppelin and you leave on a plane, then you blow stuff up and then capture a new Zeppelin and then leave on a plane, taking you back to the first level with the same spider walker, but now you shoot the bad man and you win. The final boss gives you 3 feet of movement space. I promise, you're not missing a story. The most interesting thing in the story is figuring out whether or not gorillas already existed somehow. But this game also had multiplayer, where you could throw a grenade that would affect time in a sphere around it. GameSpy might be dead, but I knew there was a site with instructions for it. I went to check that, and I don't know what I'm seeing. I have to throw the ending forward. I'll look through more time-altering games, and hopefully we'll find something better. Right, comrade? Have I seen the Fallout show? Yeah, I did recently actually, and I was not sold at all in the early previews, but when I did sit down and watch the show, the only thing I could think was that it was the polar opposite of the Halo show. It kept the tone intact, and yeah, there were some lore things I was iffy about, but the show was entertaining, so I wasn't that bothered by it. I'm not sure if they'll say it's canon going forward, but after Fallout 4, and especially Fallout 76, it's like, who cares? When it comes to a franchise, you can always ignore the next entries you don't like. Did I ever play the Time Splitters games? Yeah, they're incredible. And I'm not sure if it was 1 or 2, but I think one of the games had a full remaster inside of Homefront The Revolution for some reason. I'm not sure of the details, but that might be the most interesting thing about that game. Do Pop-Tarts or Uncrustables count as ravioli? No. I've heard a similar thing about sandwich debates where people try to say a hot dog is a sandwich, or there's like these charts where people try to categorize it. And maybe people are technically correct on some labels, but why are we disrupting the natural order? We don't need that there. Get me out of here.
It looked like Mario in the future.